Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now about a year and a half ago I made a video called This is the PC I Really Use. In it I spoke about my personal system, the components inside it and why I used it to play games and make videos with on a daily basis. This is an up-to-date version of that video featuring my new everyday machine. It's the PC I'll likely be sticking with throughout 2024, though it may receive a couple of upgrades over the course of this year. These videos give me a chance to talk about my long-term experiences with the sort of PCs I'd build on a more sensible budget, and hopefully by sharing my opinions I can help you decide whether or not the parts in it are right for your next rig. Just like before, I'll also be talking about what I'd suggest doing differently and why some components probably aren't the ones I'd necessarily choose right now. It's no secret that as a tech YouTuber I receive certain products for free. These are known as review samples. A few of said review samples have made it into this build, and in the interest of transparency I'll be clear about those that have, and I won't let this impact my honest opinions. I'm going to put footage up on screen of individual game performance tests in between the B-roll footage, just so you can see how this thing handles certain titles. So there won't be a specific dedicated benchmarking section, there'll just be gameplay as we go along and talk about the parts. Let's start with the case. I'm using the Deepcool CH560 Digital. This was sent over by Deepcool a while back and I found the inclusion of a built-in temperature monitor invaluable. I can monitor my CPU and GPU temps as well as usage, which is very helpful in games. They sent over the AK620 digital CPU cooler as well, which will also monitor temps, but I actually used this without the digital display as I prefer the look of the bare metal heatsink and fans, just an aesthetic preference. Plus, I don't really need two sets of temperature readings. Before we get to what's being powered, let's talk about what everything is being powered by. I'm using a Corsair RM650X. From what I recall, I found this inside a pre-built a while ago and paid less for the entire system than I did for the price of a new PSU on its own. It's fully modular and near silent, and when or if I upgrade to a more power-hungry configuration, I'll probably find a use for this PSU somewhere else because it would be a shame to sell it. It's a great power supply and is pretty much silent even when gaming. Now then, for the rest of the internals, my last PC featured an i5-12400F RTX 3050 and lots of ants. This one doesn't have any ants, but apart from that downgrade, everything else is a bit newer and a bit faster. The i5-12400F was and still is a fantastic chip. I think you get a lot of performance for the money. That said, after years of using an Intel-based system, I decided to build something based on AMD's latest socket AM5, and I didn't have to break the bank to do so. The motherboard inside here is a Gigabyte B650 MDS3H. I was going to go for a basic A620 board, but I found this Gigabyte one on eBay for £90. At a time it was retailing for around $150 brand new. At £90 it was also cheaper than any A620 offering, and had I not found this I definitely would have bought a basic A620 board. They are absolutely fine if the price is right, of course. Sitting atop the board and under the cooler is a Ryzen 5 7500F, currently the cheapest AM5 CPU on the market, if you can find one. I paid £160 for this on eBay a few months ago, but I've seen them at CEX for £140 and as part of sub 300 motherboard combos elsewhere. It has 6 cores and 12 threads, just like the 12400F, but it outperforms it in games and CPU intensive tasks and even beats the newer, more expensive 13400F in most gaming scenarios I've tested. Availability does leave a lot to be desired in some regions, but be sure to check out Ryzen 7600 prices as well. The 7500F is more than enough for my needs, and we have a decent upgrade path here too, in case I fancy an upgrade in the future. Speaking of upgrades, one I'd like to make sooner rather than later is the RAM. I currently have 16GB of Kingston Fury DDR5. This is CL36 memory and it's clocked at 6000 MHz. I got it in a sale on eBuyer here in the UK, from what I remember, at around £70. I don't know much about the technical side of RAM, but my system feels very snappy, and in games I found that 16 gigs is still enough, though I'd call it the minimum for any gaming PC build as we go into 2024. I've not had any issues, but I would like to swap these modules out for two 16GB sticks, simply for the fact that 32 gigs will help out with editing and rendering large videos, which is what I mainly use my PC for. Still, if you are on a tighter budget, 16GB of RAM will go nicely with a 7500F if it's primarily gaming that you want to do. I'd probably like to get a larger M.2 SSD as well. I'm currently using a PCIe 4.0 Kingston NV2. It was the cheapest SSD I could find, about £40 at the time for 1TB, but with games getting bigger and bigger, I might add another and make use of the second M.2 slot on the motherboard. Now for the most controversial bit, the graphics card. My RTX 3050 served me so well, and although it was never that easy to recommend, constantly sitting in the shadows of the RX 6600, it was great for 1080p gaming, with the occasional shiny ray tracing effect thrown in, thanks to the help of DLSS. Since then, the 40 series have come out, and Palette were kind enough to send over their RTX 4060 Dual, a card that follows reference specs but stays cool and quiet during games. I still use a 1080p 75Hz monitor as well, so this is more than enough for that kind of performance. It's a 115 watt card, uses a single 8-pin connector, and it pumps out decent frame rates, so it's suitable for me, but I would definitely see how the AMD RX 7600 is priced where you live, if 1080p 60fps gaming is what you're after. There's slightly less performance there, but you'd probably be spending less. Now, I do like the frame generation element of the 4060, and it's always interesting to see how supported games perform when enabling it, but this is definitely a feature that appeals more to the tinkering side of my brain. I like to keep the 4060 in my system to mess around with what-if scenarios, in a way. Oh, what if I just enable frame gen with maxed out settings in Cyberpunk? Will it be playable? I also like that we're seeing a lot of variations of this card, as well as some low profile choices. I would like to see prices drop a little more, of course. If you don't care about the new features or reduced power consumption, then look out for used alternatives that offer better native resolution performance at a similar price point. The 3060 Ti comes to mind, and so does the 12GB 6700 XT. If you don't mind older than that, then 2080s are worth thinking about as well, as they're still very capable cards. Honestly, the 4060 doesn't spend much time in my system with all the GPU testing that I do, but when it is in here, it's perfectly adequate. Overall, this is what I'd personally call a mid-range machine, but it's probably classed as a modern entry-level gaming system by most, considering the 7500F and 4060 are two of the lowest end components in their respective lineups. It's perfectly fine for my 1080p gaming needs, and while I'd recommend most of the parts, there is money to be saved and alternatives to be considered. You could get a really cheap case, entry-level A620 board and slightly slower memory if you wanted to save some cash, while still having a nice, capable system and an upgrade path too. On the other hand, you could spend more on 32 gigs of RAM as well as a faster graphics card. After all, the 7500F should be able to handle more, no problem, especially at higher resolutions. But that's it, my personal gaming rig for 2024. It'll be interesting to see how it handles this year, and perhaps we'll have a recap in 12 months' time. I might also test some particularly demanding games along the way to see how a system like this performs. But that's all for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you as always for watching.